but you have to be honest with yourself about what the rest of the community is doing too, right? And it gets back to having those relationships. Like, it's hard to know. And so trying to introduce open source, a lot of what you get, the first question you get is like, how do I know it's secure? And in particular, it's interesting, right? It's always hard for me to talk about this subject because I don't want to offend anybody in this stage. But one of the first challenges that ate our efficiency was like all these systems we deliver to on the other ends don't have egress access at all. And guess what? A lot of software that was built in the cloud breaks when you try to run it on an on-prem server. And so there's a lot of things you can do when you, in general, there was, unfortunately people are like, oh, that's the contractors. That's our, that's the people we pay's problem. We don't need to know about that. And I think that is a big mistake.
Hello, my name is Ildiko.
And I'm Phil.
And this is the My Open Source Experience podcast, where we discuss all the things about the mechanics of open source in business and in communities. Follow the podcast on your favorite platform and check out season 2 episodes with Samson Gotti,
Open source is interesting,
Claire Dillon,
great collaboration,
Wayne Starr,
freedom,
Stephen Wally,
good engineering,
Austen Bryan,
Community,
Tom Sadler,
collaboration,
Federico Gonzalez Waite,
limitless,
Amanda Brock,
the future,
Gregory Kurtzer,
collaborative,
Michael Dexter,
freedom,
and Kelsey Hightower.
Open source is your opportunity to change the world around you.
We have Austen Bryan on our podcast today, and I am super excited because, well, on one hand, we are diving into open source, and on the other hand, we will talk a little bit about the business side of things, which I know interests a lot of people out there in the audience. But before we do that, just to get a little bit of understanding of where Austen is coming from, could you please tell us and our audience a little bit about yourself, like what your background is, how did you get into tech, and what's your connection to open source? What do you do today? These kind of things.
Yeah, would love to. So thanks for having me on. I always love to talk the intersection of open source and specifically national security in this case, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit today. But I was, traditionally trained as a computer engineer. I actually thought I was going to get into like chips and transistors, which is what I wanted to do. But the free market said I was only a software developer, and that's the only thing I could get a job doing at the time, actually in quality assurance at that. So ended up writing software for about 2 to 3 years full time, and then decided to commission into the United States Air Force as a computer engineer as well, but spent about 11 and a half years active duty, moving around the country, helping the United States. They call it acquire things, which is interesting because a lot of people hear acquire and they think mergers and acquisitions. It's not really like that. It's more helping things, the right requirements get on the right contracts with the right teammates, and then kind of overseeing the technical delivery of some large system that does some sort of military specific thing. So I was involved with some aircraft stuff initially, then some satellite operational things a little bit outside of my career field. And then I moved into, I actually was like, hey, Air Force, I would love to do something very software related because that's what I know how to do. 8 years into my career at that point. And I got a chance to go to San Antonio, Texas to work at a very unique operational unit who makes effectively exploits. But I showed up and they gave me a great bait and switch and said, actually, we just got a new program. You need to go work on that instead because you're too senior, basically, for where we were trying to match you. So all that said, I got matched to a program that was trying to create a software platform for cyber operations. And that's what restarted me getting into software at the more tactical, source code level. And the journey of like DevSecOps and cloud and all these things when I was writing software in 2009 previously was not like, Agile was still felt like a new concept, at least where I was at the time in 2009. So I had a lot to catch up on But that started me on a journey to help start a program called Platform One in the Department of Defense, which ended up getting funded by Congress to be kind of a DevOps platform that other programs could use to deliver software through. And then one of the people I helped do that with got out of the military and started a company called Defense Unicorns, which has a silly but fun kind of name. And had tried to convince me to come do that with him, but I'm very risk adverse, and I had a whole career going, and I was like, yeah, I don't think that's for me. But as things went on, I was like, man, I don't want to do non-software things. And the Air Force has you move around to require more breadth than depth. And so, as I said, I always say I was a computer engineer. I don't feel like one anymore. I got an MBA after that, and I mostly have had to follow the dollars and cents since then. But I still like to talk about software and people with software. And so excited to kind of talk about that intersection of software and business, because especially in the open source world and especially the national security market. So it's like selling to government plus open source plus software plus business. You have a very unique Venn diagram. So that's kind of the niche I fell into over the last, 15 years now after being at Defense Unicorns.
So as a kind of a summary, you studied computer engineering, hardware, you wanted something to do with hardware, and then the job market kind of reoriented you towards software, and then you got into the Air Force, and then at one point you did your MBA as well to look into the business side of things because of what you were doing. Is that roughly accurate?
That is, yep. And I think what I've learned over the last 3 years, especially being out of the military now, it's really lended itself well to like product management and product leadership as a career field, because I've started to formulate my own strong opinions of what that looks like. But it's definitely trying to organize what I'll call cross-functional teams, whether it be marketing, sales, engineering, design. You kind of got to get everybody aligned to do one thing and figure out what problem to solve next and why. And so I would say, that mix of engineering and business has kind of landed me in product management, somewhat by accident, but I do really like it. And so right now for Defense Unicorns, that's what I do. I lead our product department.
I'm very interested and excited to dive into like that where open source meets business and vice versa, because there seemed to be a lot of struggle around that in well, all places in the industry as well as all layers of a corporate organization. So I'm curious to learn how like your education in both tech as well as the MBA, how that contributed to your experience throughout your career journey. But before we go into that, I'm also curious if you remember where you first learned about open source. Like, when did you hear the term first? How did you got in contact with it?
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about. I mean, I knew open source was like a term people use, but I definitely didn't know what I was talking about. And it was about 2019 for me. I was, like I said, I was helping start a software program as an active duty military officer, and I realized that a lot of our, what you ought to do on the business side sometimes is what I call manage your supply chain in general. And I don't necessarily mean from a security perspective, but you have to know who all your external dependencies are to be successful, because you have to have some sort of relationship there to mitigate risk. And as I pulled back the dependency tree of things we were doing, I kept realizing how much we were dependent on open source. And then I realized there was a massive community. Actually, somebody invited me to KubeCon. I think it had to have been 2019, because there wasn't one in 2020, if I remember right. I remember showing up and being extremely overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. I think it was San Diego that year. It was somewhere in California. Either way, I showed up, what I'll call like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Like I was like excited to just be part of it. And then I walk into like the vendor floor and there's, 10,000 people there. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm not really an extrovert. I'm somewhere in between extroverted and introverted. So like the amount of people in one space kind of gave me a little bit of like fight or flight moment. So for me, that was kind of like my induction into it. And I, at the time was working closely with Red Hat, who obviously has a very large presence and different relationship with the open source community. So I kind of got introduced through that vein, and then Kubernetes was talked about a lot in 2019 in the circles I was in, which I realized is probably about 5 years after the project started. But everything in that ecosystem then, like, I feel like fell into my lap. But I was in the government, who's always late to things for a lot of valid reasons, actually. So I kind of became the person in the government who was talking a lot about Kubernetes and platforms and software. And in general, there was, unfortunately, people are like, oh, that's the contractors. That's that's the people we pay's problem. We don't need to know about that. And I think that is a big, big mistake to not be software fluent in this world anymore, especially, I mean, now data fluent too with AI. So yeah, that was my introduction and baptism into all things open source.
So your very first experience was Kubernetes and a large conference of KubeCon. So that's how you started to learn about this whole open source thing.
Yes, that is exactly how it happened.
Like beyond being overwhelmed by the sheer number of people at the conference, like how how was this first experience for you? Not the conference itself, but diving into the land of open source, because open source and proprietary software development are two completely different things. So I'm kind of interested in your experience in terms of the learning curve, and if you got any chance with during the conference or outside of the conference of KubeCon to get in touch with the community, or did all that come later?
Yeah, that's a big question to answer. It definitely came later for me. I think, especially as somebody who wasn't writing software anymore, it's intimidating to come upon a massive repository of a huge mature project in particular. And I think I would describe myself as naive originally, right? Like there were people who were working with me who were software developers, and it was like, hey, this is great. It's open source. If we have issues with it, we can just submit issues or even PRs, and we'll just be part of the community. What I want to say that naive is like, if people don't know who you are and the projects are huge and there's a lot of mouths to feed, so to speak, you kind of just get ignored, even if you're trying to do something well intentioned. And so I think I realized, like anything else, there's this group of people that are involved, right? And like anything else in life, if you don't spend time getting to know them and building a relationship, you're still kind of, I mean, while you can see the source code and decisions being made and you can follow along, which takes some level of expertise even to do that, you don't really have any control or influence, right? You have to earn those things through hard work, and whether that be time and energy making relationships or like having your team, because I wasn't capable of contributing myself, at least not to the code base, right? And yeah, I think I was just naive to begin with. And so I think what I realized is we should hire people who are maintainers or help support projects directly financially, which trying to get the government to do that is a whole nother ball game, especially trying to give money to anybody for anything, but especially open source. Yeah, like I feel like you're pushing a rock up a giant boulder, or sorry, a boulder up a giant mountain at that point. And that's kind of where I was, circa 2019, then COVID in 2020. That's kind of where I was.
Just to be able to connect some context, what position were you in 2019? I mean, which organization, if you can share, and like what type of position you were in? Like, what were your goals as part of your job when Kubernetes came into the picture, to understand that like business side of things a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I was to use non-jargon, hopefully from the government side of the world that's invented more acronyms than anybody. I was a government program manager, right? So at the end of the day, I was managing cost, schedule, performance of like some requirement had flowed through the Pentagon back down to the program I was at in San Antonio, Texas at the time. In particular, this was like, hey, go build the cyber operations is what they call it, which is groups of people who monitor networks across a bunch of different defense places. They wanted one platform where they could put a bunch of their capabilities and their data so that they could kind of monitor the ongoing operations. And so I was one of the more senior program managers at this office, and my job was to help mostly figure out who to partner with, right? Like what technologies to acquire. And again, acquire in their terms is a little bit different than ours, but like, hey, who should we partner with and why? What are the capabilities? Can we actually deliver them in our context? And so it's a big ask when like you're trained to be a program manager or trained in mission effects. And like I hadn't been in software for a while. And now there's like, I always like to pull up the CNCF landscape chart to like overwhelm people. like, hey, go build a platform, and you're like, okay, there's 8 billion tools, it feels like, on this thing in different categories. And I'm like, how do I get, especially as the government, I'm like, how do I convince vendor X to give me tool Y to work with vendor Z to build this other part? And so I felt like I was putting together a puzzle set with like 1,000 pieces, and I had no idea what in every piece looked like, right? I was just trying to like throw things against the wall at that point.
When it comes to your work with open source, like there's part of utilizing open source, the part where your user, like the organization, either already is convinced or you show them the value of using open source software over proprietary. So that's one side, and the other side is like being a user is kind of risky in business terms if you're just using open source software. So you need to invest in that piece of software and the project, and that investment is usually time investment and working upstream. In your professional journey, do you have experience with both sides? I mean, introducing open source software into the supply chain and also introducing the part of investment and working upstream.
Yeah, maybe it's probably not in the traditional sense of maybe other guests that you've had on. At Defense Unicorns, this isn't a problem. That's why I keep going back to my government stuff, because our founders, I'm not one of them, but I followed them around from both of these organizations. It's just like a value tenet of theirs, so they default there, and then we shift only if data says we have to. And so we haven't had to in a lot of good ways. But on the government side, it was really interesting because it starts getting into some of the risks that the government evaluates when it comes to using open source, which is unique. And it's usually around security. There is just really a culture of, I get why there's a lot of good reasons there's extremely risk aversion, especially for certain very, very critical missions that go on. But that kind of permeates to all decisions when it doesn't necessarily need to, right? There's a time and place for it, and there's a time and place that it doesn't make sense. And so trying to introduce open source, a lot of what you get, the first question you get is like, how do I know it's secure? And in particular, it's interesting, right? It's always hard for me to talk about this subject because I don't want to offend anybody in this day anymore. But the government has certain stigmatisms around certain nation states and their contributions to things. It's just a fact. And that, I'm not trying to say any bias or stereotypes for myself, but the government will ask you, does country X, Y, or Z on this list contribute, or is a core contributor or a maintainer, or even an owner of the company that is the maintainer? And you get those questions and you have to answer them. The thing I appreciate about open source, and I think people fail to understand who don't come in this from the software community, is the good thing about open source is all that information at a minimum is available to you, right? Like you can figure it out yourself. And what people fail to realize, that they kind of get fixated on open source and they forget, like, it's an analysis of open source compared to closed source or private software, right? Private software, yeah, maybe the company's telling you X, Y, or Z, but you have no evidence, right? Like it's all circumstantial. And so that was the part that always frustrated me. I was like, I as a user or investigator, decision maker, I can at least see the data on one side. The other side, I'm just being told what to believe. And that was always frustrating for me because, you hit the security wall as the first burden you hit. And it's like you gotta evaluate the whole set of options, not just fixate on one and why one is assumed to not be good enough, right? You have to compare the two to have a relative analysis to make a decision. And that was extremely frustrating for me, right? And I think I'm lucky now that I followed a bunch of like-minded people who believe in this community, so it's very, very different now. But a lot of our customers are still those same people, that the tribe that I came from. And so we're in a unique circumstance of like trying to bridge the community, especially because a lot of great software talent is international. Like there's also this fallacy in the governments that you grow up in, of like the United States has the best everything. That's not true. There's exceptional talent all over this world, and I'm sure that resonates. And we are in a position of like, we want to do the best we can for national security, but that does, like, if we're being honest, that does mean bringing in international talent. Like it's just, those two things are the same. And trying how we do that with our customer base is difficult. It's difficult. You need, at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to the same theme that we've kind of been on. It requires the right customer relationship of people who are open-minded, that share your values. And if you can have a logic-based conversation, it kind of becomes obvious and they align with you. But not everybody, again, who's open-minded to those conversations, it's just like, no, that's new and dangerous. It's risky. Don't even want to talk about it, right? If they're not even willing to have a conversation, just like any other topic in this world, it's like, you feel like you're just shouting into the abyss at that point.
I mean, I find Defense Unicorns to be a very interesting company providing a significant value in a space that fits between a very conservative organization, the government, and this very still kind of wild west environment of open source, right? And I look at it from two perspectives, one of which is, so yes, your management gets this, they're keeping things as open as possible, but like I said, I mean, you get to be a vendor of and a representative that puts some level of control and normalcy and typical vendor process for your customer, be it the government, around that space. And that's a huge value for your customer. And it also is a significant, it's a way of building business value that isn't directly tied to the software, which I see so very often to be a struggle and quite frankly, one that I rarely can reconcile with a typical, open core or any other type of business model, so to speak, around open source. That value that you bring, the service that you bring to your customer. Yeah, talk a little bit about that. I mean, how does your management see that? Is it true? I mean, I'm not saying it's all butterflies and unicorns either. As far as the government going, oh well, defense unicorns, they're a prime. Maybe not. So you're not of that stature. It's not as though you don't have hurdles, but you're also making significant ground, and I expect laying some norms that didn't exist before that are very helpful. Can you talk a little bit about that? And am I right in that perception, or do I paint too rosy a picture?
No, I'll address the rosy part first, then kind of zoom out to explain how we operate, because I do think it is pretty unique, trying to be unbiased in that opinion. But I think a lot of times something that frustrates me in our collective space is like the LinkedIn persona of how awesome it is to work at a software startup. Like it actually is really freaking hard, like really hard. It requires not only hard work and discipline, but it requires a lot of writing, a lot of reading, a lot of learning. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to go join this remote async vibe. And I'm like, it is that. But what I like to tell people, especially when we interview them, is like, the work is the work. And we are flexible that you can like piece it around, but it doesn't go away. Like you got to choose the time that it's still going to happen, right? You can't just make it go away. And I bring that up because it's not just Defense Unicorns. There's a collection of other companies that are like us who I think we're all kind of standing on each other's shoulders in some ways. I know that analogy isn't perfect, but there's been a collection of us, I think, breaking glass in this idea of like software integration can happen differently for this space than it has in the past. And you bring up a great point. I was like, when I first took this job, my CEO, Rob Slaughter, everything is free at Defense Unicorns, meaning the software. And my job in a lot of ways with a couple of my peers is like, we got to make money still somehow so that we can be a part of this community. So like you're painting yourself into a very constrained box intentionally, but it's worked. But to answer your question up front is like, it hasn't been easy. Right. And I think what I would describe as Defense Unicorns, the way we've done it, is I look at us like if my grandma, and she says like, what is Defense Unicorns? That sounds made up. Like, what do you do every day? And I try to explain it first, and I don't mean to belittle people's intelligence because I know that's not the case for the following of this podcast, but we deliver other people's software. I think of us like FedEx or UPS. I know Amazon's kind of eaten their own chain in that way, so it's not as good of an analogy anymore, but like people identify something they want, and then they need it to go over here, right? And that here is a pretty unique spot. In some cases, you could compare it to like shipping something to Hawaii in this case, right? We do that part, right? Like we go pick it up, put it in a box, secure it all nice and tight, put it somewhere else, unpack it so it still does what you thought it was going to do, right? That's what we do as a company. And I describe it that way first to say, like, I think software, I would almost consider us a software system integrator, right? Instead of just a system integrator, specifically a software system integrator. So because we do that, that doesn't mean we're not a product company who doesn't build productized solutions to make ourselves more efficient, right? Because our project that we just donated to OpenSSF, ZARF, which is the kind of flagship thing we started with, is an air gap deployment tool for Kubernetes specifically right now. It can probably do other things in the future too. But one of the first challenges that ate our efficiency was like all these systems we deliver to on the other ends don't have egress access at all. And guess what? A lot of software that was built in the cloud breaks when you try to run it on an on-prem server. And so there's a lot of things you can do when you package up all the dependencies and redeploy them and reroute them to do that. And that's what ZARF is. Then you have the problem of integrating multiple applications together, typically running in Kubernetes. So we wrote a controller to do that for us so that we can automate some of that away, right? We're just eating steps of this value chain. But to get to the overall point, the reason I wanted to zoom out first is you're 100% right. What I love about us is we sit in between software suppliers who want to do good things to help national security and the national security market, and they don't know how to talk to each other. And we have went through the pain of learning that translation. And so a lot of the business value we provide is what I'll call the market research and acquisition steps of value delivery. Like those are left of even touching the software. We can help the government understand their gap analysis, help them understand the 12 vendors that may have solutions that help them evaluate it, make it discoverable, comparable. Just like when I need to buy something, I go to Amazon first myself, and I can see 17,000 different vendors at this point that sell the same thing, and I can quickly check stars and prices and see when it can get to my house. Like that's all we're trying to do for the government space, right? Like the suppliers want in, they know it's good for their business to sell if they have somebody to help, right? But typically when they don't do it, their business case internally is like, it's too much to staff the contracting officers. It's too much to figure out the federal acquisition regulation. It's too much to understand their legal. Well, they have a partner in that now, right? Like if they don't have to do that and we're willing to take that cost on and then make the transaction with the government and share in that revenue, now both sides can close that gap, right? And I think that's the business value. Getting back to your question, is like the business value isn't just software. The business value is understanding how to work with governments. And there's a lot that can be done. Again, even productize. Can't productize everything probably end to end, but you can make it a lot better with products.
No, exactly. And that's why I find your company such a great example to talk about how that value sits outside of the software, right? The software that you work on, the software that you contributed to OpenSSF, ZARF, great tool. It's a technology widget. It is not a solution, right?
Correct.
It's something that can be used. You've incorporated it into a much broader ecosystem that you're providing to your customer, right? To the benefit of, as you say, the vendors that you're working with that are trying to deliver software. And that's what I think is so often missed when organizations try to create these pieces of software and then quote unquote build a business around it. It's such a non-starter to me. And I think that's why we're seeing the rug pulls we're seeing with various companies going, yeah, this open source thing isn't working anymore. I need to get more customers paying revenue. Let's change the license. And that's just alienating an entire ecosystem that, thought that we were all doing the same thing working together. So that's why, I can easily explain the value that Red Hat brings. And it's not just support and service. It's building an ecosystem of software providers that hardware vendors can lock onto with customers. And same thing for software customers or software vendors working with their customers. What hardware does this thing run on, right? I mean, they built that ecosystem and that entire trust network between software application vendors and hardware vendors with an operating system that is going to work on both, right? That's the value that they brought. And similarly, that's what you're bringing with your customers and your partners. So I like to be able to call that out just as a great example of putting value, providing significant value that's actually not directly coupled to the software, and the software is just a widget.
Yeah, the vision for us, I would describe it another way, is like a marketplace that is like national security as a first class customer. Because the good thing about a marketplace is they're well understood. That's not a thing where you have to translate anymore. Like everybody interacts with the marketplace if they use Amazon or even any cloud services like Azure, right?
Yep.
What we want to do is do that in a way that we know the things being put in the marketplace can actually get to a national security customer. So like that's really the vision for defense unicorns, right? To your point about building an ecosystem, we want competition. We saw on the inside how good competition is for the defense space. And keep in mind, it's all of our tax dollars being used to procure those things. So it's good for all of us. Like, and so we just want to populate a place where the data is transparent and people can make clear buyer decisions and know that value can be delivered, right? Because too often, I can tell you so many times in the government, I've seen people go through all the steps to get somebody on contract, and on the other end, they get a license key to software. Well, if you're a government program manager, and this literally happened to me, I get a license key emailed to me on whatever base I'm sitting on. That literally does me no good. I need somebody to deploy the software and enable the license key and meet all my cybersecurity compliance from NIST 800-53, be on call for operations. I think there's this fallacy with the lack of training in the software ecosystem that like buying a piece of software off the shelf is your solution. That is like one step out of 1,000 that you need, right? And that's why it gets complicated. You need an ecosystem or a marketplace around it that does a lot of things together. And the more people that are willing to work with the national security market, the better it is, because it's like, again, going back to an MBA that I got to early in my career, but like a free economy is a free economy. Competition drives down price. Like it's just basic economics at that point. And so that's what we're trying to do. That's more of a vision statement. It's where we're headed. But I think that's why we're so happy that there's other people in this space. We don't want it to just be us. The more people, the better, just like open source, right? The more eyes, the more contributions, the more conversation, the more thought leaders, the better, right? It's more informed policy. It's more informed vendors. It, like, to us, being open and transparent is a value and like a cultural norm. It's not like a thing that we do. It's who we are.
You either built a way to have intuition, or you have a system to kind of decide what makes sense to have as an open source project versus what you keep as your business value. Can you share anything about that system, or how you decide what goes where? Because I mean, it sounds like that you look at it and you kind of know, but how do you know?
Man, I wish there was an easy answer to that question. I think a lot of it's intuition by our CEO and CTO, who are two of the three founders at the company still. So I would like to say there's magic to it. I do think you learn, you look for things along the way and learn. I would say the easiest way to do it is ask yourself, like, is this a common problem for a lot of people? And if it is, building it in the open, in my opinion, is the right thing to do. Like, we knew nobody was doing air gap deployments, so we put that at the time. So we put that in the open. We're working on a tool called Lula that's more about compliance, like ingesting compliance, mapping it and binding it to software, and then evaluating that in CI or runtime. There are so many different implementations of like, I need to implement this policy. How do I know if my software is implementing this policy? How do I audit it? Like, that's an easy one to me, because like there's a community around that, and that's not magic, right? Like, if you make it agnostic to the policy you ingest and then validate, like, then people can take it and do whatever they want. That doesn't mean we can't, on our productization side, use our, like, tune things so it very efficiently runs on our policy and our enforcement. But like, generically binding software to policy is not interesting. It's not, I don't want to say it's not interesting. It's not unique to us. And so I don't know, that's a great answer, but we definitely ask ourselves that a lot. We did have something we were doing as open source, and we pulled it out of open source. I say open source, meaning it's still on GitHub, it's still Apache 2.0, but we are no longer going to donate it. It's an AI tool, and it's not because it's not great. It's just that we were, quite frankly, being outpaced by other people, and we started just using their stuff. So we're like, well, we're going to divest in what we're doing, and we're just going to use what they're doing. So we are a consumer a lot of ways too. So some of the times, that's the only one I can think of that we kind of made a change, midway through development. But you have to be honest with yourself about what the rest of the community is doing too, right? And it gets back to having those relationships. Like, it's hard to know the truth of what's going on unless you can actually like email, Slack people, call them, and actually get the real download rather than what people put in a README doc or on company web pages.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it's also the case that your original premise, I'm going to assume that your founders had the original premise for the real business value provided wasn't necessarily one way or the other really, rotating around open source to begin with, in the sense that, and I know other companies that have done this too, it sounds very much like Defense Unicorns was formed because folks inside of the government recognized that they could do the things that would help the government more if they weren't in the government. And so you created a relationship where that's what you ended up doing. And open source is just, again, it's a tool. It's not the end all be all. It's a tool, and you can figure out what makes the most sense to, as you said, this is also not uncommon. You're building an internal tool, and at some point you go, dang, these folks in the open source just keep doing better. So we're just going to go use that. And so, and you shift and you adapt, right? And it's all very fast paced in software, and open source kind of just accelerates that.
Yeah, you nailed it, Phil. Like our CEO has said regularly to people, especially who's recruiting them, that the best way to help the government sometimes is not to be in the government. And that's not always true, but it is true sometimes. And the thing I'll just say is, like, it was harder to share source code in the government written by the government than it was to leave the government, write it in GitHub, and then just give it back to them for free. And
it's not the first time I've heard that. So
yeah,
which is why,
so you nailed it.
I have just a few clarifying questions. I think you said a phrase along the lines of, like, if there's a problem that a lot of people have, then having the project open source and building a community to solve it is the right thing to do. When you said that, was right thing to do in the terms of a right thing to do for the business or right thing to do for humanity, or both?
It's the right thing to do for everybody else, not the business, which I think sometimes those things can be at odds, as people probably know that have helped run businesses before. But I think that's why people are really passionate at the company we're at, is because we always try to put what we call the mission above ourselves, right? So if, we've actually just recently, I was reached out to by a foreign country's government office through LinkedIn, and they wanted to talk about Zarf. And I was like, I had no idea somebody over there was using our stuff. I'm not sure if they'd be comfortable being mentioned, so I won't. But it's also really rewarding. And so our developers feel the same way, right? Like when you get contacted by somebody who received value and is doing something important for their country, with software you made and you didn't even know they were using you away. Like at the end of the day, I think everybody who writes software, and I used to do it, so I'll put myself in the shoes for just a second. Like, you want people to use what you created. The most frustrating thing is when nobody uses it. So even if somebody's using it for free, typically the developers don't care. They just want to make sure their salary's coming in. And so, but like, whether it's somebody over here or somebody over there, pay, not pay, the developer doesn't care. They're excited that somebody has received value from what the hard work they put in. And so I had a few of my core developers hop on with that call because I thought it was fascinating, and they walked away more energized than I've ever seen. And like, had they not reached out to me on LinkedIn, we would have never known. And I doubt they'll ever be, maybe they'll become a customer of ours someday, but that wasn't the intent, right? Like maybe not. But even what I told them is, like, joining our Slack Connect or joining our Slack on Kubernetes and being an active user, giving us, even as a product person, right, giving us validation or invalidation of things we're doing is still value to the business, even though it's not dollars. And so not wasting dollars is just as important as spending dollars, right? And so invalidating features is a huge thing. And so that was really our authentic way to approach people, is like, yeah, just join our community first and just talk to us and like help us understand what we're doing. And, if things grow from there, great. If they don't need to, they don't need to. And that's fine with us. But yeah, it's what's right for everybody else, not just ourselves.
On kind of that point and the community building, like when you say donate a project, that means to transfer the project to an open source foundation, nonprofit organization, who then helps build a bigger community, bigger ecosystem around the project that it already had. Is that a accurate way of putting it, how you're using the word donate?
Yes. I've also been told by developers to call it contribution. So I use the word donate. Maybe I'm wrong. But we literally, I went through this for the first time actually with Zarf just a couple weeks ago. You sign legal documents, you notarize them, you transfer IP and trademarks of the logo, Yep, you give up. We just moved just today, we moved our Zarf GitHub repo that's been there for 3 years to a generic one that's not our company, it's not slash our company Zarf anymore. And our website domain, we're transferring ownership of that to Linux Foundation. So when I like to use the word donate because it feels like I just took something to Goodwill, right? Like my personal life, not that it's comparing the organizations, but you see what I mean, right? Like we showed up and said, here you go, this is yours now. I mean, we are obviously still actively maintaining it we have another maintainer on the project and not our company. So we're very involved. We're still staffing it, but like it's not ours anymore. We don't control everything anymore. And that was intentional because we want the community to have trust that we're not going to change for our own selfish needs. Like we're forcing us, or we have forced ourselves to be governed by others to not do that.
I mean, it's actually an interesting compromise, right? Because while the trademark, you have given something over to a neutral place, but the copyright is still yours. And so it's not as though you've given away all of your intellectual property, but you have made it so that there's a level of clear path to a clear level playing field, right? That makes it easier. So I find this type of thing when contributing or giving that level of intellectual property, be it the trademark of the project, to a neutral body, like it means something. But quite frankly, there's a lot of control you didn't give up. There's a lot of intellectual property you didn't give up, which is good. But you're stating an intent, which is an important step. But it isn't the entire giving away everything either. So it's a compromise.
Yeah, that's a fair clarification. I would also, like, for us, we view our best IP as our best people. Like,
yep,
those people still work at Defense Unicorns and they still have full context of the code base. That's the greatest risk mitigation from a pure business perspective. And that's why I went back to like keeping our developers happy. That is a religious commitment at our company that our people ops team does a fantastic job of, but everybody plays a role, right, in creating a culture people want to be a part of.
Before we depart, can you tell us something about yourself that has nothing to do with tech and nothing to do with open source? It can be a hobby or any kind of a fun fact that you don't mind sharing.
That's exciting. I'm a very, very boring person. I'm a husband, father, and trying to work on the leadership team of a startup. So I have very little time for hobbies these days. I guess an interesting thing for me that I felt has honestly helped me in open source a little bit too is I've been to almost all 50 states over my time in the military. It was kind of, I don't know, blessed / cursed to not move around a lot, but I consider it like I've been there. And what you realize is how diverse the culture is, even in the United States. But it's also taken me to, I think, 8 foreign countries. So a lot of people I've realized that are, especially my age or my point in my career, they've lived in such a small space, right? They haven't realized just how diverse and how diversity, and I don't mean it to get on some sort of soapbox about that, but there is so much diverse thought out there and different ways of life, decision making, like those types of things I think have helped me in open source, right? So traveling around a little bit, I think just opens you up to being a lot more open-minded and having different conversations. And so I mean, I can tell we could go through our favorite states too on a different podcast someday, but I definitely have favorites. But I've been around the United States and a little bit internationally, but not that much. So.
I mean, that's awesome. Do you have an absolute favorite or you have like a list of favorites?
Only because a little bit's nostalgia. Like I love Colorado to death because growing up in Nebraska, that's where you can go to vacation. So it's kind of a boring answer. The Pacific Northwest is great though too. I love cool weather and mountains, so it's also a great option. But those are generically my favorite places.
Okay, just out of curiosity, did we talk about where Phil and I live or?
No, well, I think Phil's in Colorado somewhere. I don't think you've told me where you were at.
Oh, I'm in Washington, so I'm in Pacific Northwest.
Oh, I nailed it. I didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah, like thank you for your research on our backgrounds and catering to our taste. I'm just totally joking, but no, that was amazing. And I definitely love Colorado too. And no, I was curious if you might mention places where I haven't been yet, but I obviously agree with all the things you said.
That's awesome.
And with that, that's all, folks. That was our episode for today. We want to hear from you. Please leave comments under the episodes that you watched. Share your feedback and share your experiences to continue the conversation. And let us know what topics you would like to hear next. We already have a lot of great content lined up for season 2. We will talk about inner source, or in other words, why and how companies are using open source methodologies internally. We will talk about why and how governments are using open source and touch on upcoming legislations such as the Cyber Resiliency Act in Europe. We will also discuss how to create open source projects and communities that last for decades. Stay tuned because the next episode is just around the corner.
Wouldn't you wish there was a silver budget bullet, but no, silver budget as well. Silver budget that is
that's
a silver
what you
bullet.
need is a silver. Exactly.
That's it. And to be fair, some people.
So I bought some bidets. This should have been a very simple project. This should be simple. What bidet do you want? You install the bidet and you sit down and you enjoy the bidet. That's it, simple. But I bought the best bidet. And you know how engineers go. Nothing simple.
But we just had a good time just talking and whatnot. And by the end of it, he figured out I played pretty quick. So by the end of it, he actually made me play with him. And so I played music with Kix Brooks. That was fun.
Way cool. That's a great story.
He is waiting for me to finish this podcast so that I don't know if you